Okay, everyone. Welcome to Positivity Bias Lesson 2 or Episode 2. And this is a truly fascinating, insightful topic that we're going to discuss today. So last week we discussed an overview, a way to see the situation in which we find ourselves in right now, and how to look at the COVID-19 realities from a new lens. But now we're going to take a step back and we're going to approach the general concept of having a bias or prejudice, and about having a bias or a prejudice and how we can make it positive. So first, let's start off with a basic idea. We all know that we are biased towards the people we love or hate, God forbid. So we definitely see them in a different light. But can we ever be objective about anything? So the picture we have up on the screen is Mr. Charles Roth. He was the executive director of the National Jewish Post. And when he met with the Rebbe, he was the executive director for 29 years. And when he met with the Rebbe, he told the Rebbe, we are a independent publication that's completely unbiased and completely objective. And the Rebbe said, you can, independent maybe, objective not likely. It's almost impossible for a person to be free of bias. So it's true that we could be unbeholden to any particular ideology or organization, but we cannot live without a bias. Through a mix of nature, nurture, and free will, we each possess a certain frame in which we see the world around us, and that becomes our lens. And that's colored by our deeply held beliefs from observations, from experiences. It affects everything. No matter how hard we try to free ourselves from bias or a particular point of view, we automatically have it. So this is, whether we're conscious of it or not, we have this reality. Okay, so this is something to always think about. What are my biases and how can I adjust them, if at all adjustable? Because we definitely live with a bias. We can't be free of a bias, but maybe we could channel our bias to be positive. So the premise of the book that this course is based off, Rabbi Mendel Kamensin's book, is that the Rebbe had an extreme positivity bias. That means the way he saw things was in an optimistic light and positive point of view. And once I start pointing out a few of these stories and letters from the Rebbe, it's hard to miss. And you're like, yeah, obviously the Rebbe had an optimistic point of view. So here's 3 examples of the Rebbe's optimistic view. So example number 1. There was once a person who wrote to the Rebbe in a letter describing the blatant disrespect that he witnessed when he was traveling, and he came to a synagogue, and what he saw was so disturbing to him that he had to vent what he saw to the Rebbe. What did he witness? He saw there was a Jew who came to synagogue and pulled out a newspaper and was reading newspaper in the middle of the service. So to this man, the level of disrespect that a person comes to a holy, sacred place like the synagogue, and instead of praying, he holds out a newspaper publicly to read. So this is the Rebbe's reply. It's a letter dated July 11th, 1960, or the Hebrew, which was actually dated 16th Tammuz 5720. And this was what the Rebbe wrote to him. everyone, of course, reacts to an experience in a way that is closest to him. Thus, for my part, I make the following observation. Look how the Rebbe twisted this perception, this occurrence. He said, first, I see in this situation the degree of Jewish attachment that one finds in every single Jew. For here is a person who has wandered off to a remote part of the world and has become so far removed, not only geographically, but also mentally, as to have no concept of what prayer is or what a house of God is. Yet, one finds in him the Jewish spark. This divine soul, this Jewish spark, seeks expression as best as it can. In the case of this particular Jew, it seeks expression in at least enabling other Jews to pray congregationally. He therefore goes out of his way to help them and at the same time to be counted with them. So while one man saw in this Jew disrespect for a synagogue reading a newspaper in public, the Rebbe saw the Jewish spark where someone who is so far removed mentally from Jewish community is yet spending his time to go to synagogue to help with a minyan. And so that's a way of his divine soul finding an expression as best as it can. So that's story number one. Here's another example of the Rebbe's positivity bias. So here we have Shirley Chisholm. Shirley Chisholm was elected in 1968 to represent New York's 12th congressional district, which included her own neighborhood of Crown Heights. She made headlines as the first African-American woman elected to Congress. However, she soon found her congressional career stunted at its start by race-related politics. Bowing to political pressures from Southern politicians, the House leadership decided to put her on a committee where she wouldn't be able to have influence on her agenda. Her campaign promise was to have an impact on the inner city, but her committee, they put her on the agriculture committee, which relates to rural farmers. And so it was a real, which will have very little influence on her ability to go and pursue the things that she wanted. And so she felt very deeply depressed and angry. But then her office received a phone call from the Rebbe's secretary. And the secretary said, the Lubavitcher Rebbe wants to see you. And during the meeting, the Rebbe told the congresswoman as follows, I know you're very upset. And she said, yes, I'm deeply insulted. What should I do? So the Rebbe told something that stunned Chisholm. He said, what a blessing God has given you. This country has so much surplus food, and there are so many hungry people. You can use this gift that God gave you, your current position on the agriculture committee, to feed hungry people. So find a creative way to do it. Tasked with this charge, Chisholm happened to meet Senator Bob Dole on her first day in Washington. He was looking for help in Midwestern farmers who were losing money on their crops. Americans have started importing produce, the senator told her, and as a result of those imports, our farmers are losing business. Now they have a huge surplus of unsold food and we don't know what to do with it. Aha, Chisholm thought. The Rebbe's advice. So during the next few years, Chisholm worked to expand the National Food Stamp Program, which we know as food stamps and SNAP, which allowed poor Americans to buy subsidized food from Midwestern farmers. Finally, in 1973, the Agriculture and Consumer Protection Act mandated that food stamps be made available in every jurisdiction in the United States. So she, together with Senator Dole, went on to co-create SNAP, co-create the WIC program, the Special Supplemental Natural Program for Women, Infants, and Children, which today benefits millions of people each month. And during her retirement party, she shared the following moving words. She said, I owe all of this to a rabbi who was an optimist, who taught me that what you may think is a challenge is actually a gift from God. And if poor babies have milk and poor children have food today, it's because this rabbi in Crown Heights had vision. So while she saw her situation as a setback, the rabbi constantly looked for the hidden spark of goodness that was in it and charged her with a mission. You are not challenged, you are actually gifted with a position to have great influence on the nutrition of children in America. So that's example number 2. And I just saw a news story the other day that they're repeating now in the farmers don't have any workers because many workers are from Mexico and they couldn't get their visas because of the lockdown. And so a lot of food was just piling up and going to go to waste. And the government just arranged that there should be a meeting where the government bought the food to give to poor. So we see history repeating itself on the model that was started with the SNAP and WIC programs that Shirley Chisholm gave the credit to the Rebbe. So that's story number 2. Story number 3. This is a crazy story. So in 1977, it was the end of Sukkot. It was Shmini Atzeres, when Jews dance with the Torah. And during dancing with the Torah, the Rebbe his face became very white. And they immediately realized that it was a medical emergency. So they cleared out 770. Ultimately, it was discovered that the Rebbe had a heart attack. It comes 2 days later. They set up an emergency ICU intensive care unit in the Rebbe's office. And he said he wants to speak to the Hasidim. So they told him, the doctors told the Rebbe, and here's a picture that I'm sharing on the screen, is Dr. Ira Weiss and Dr. Louis Tischholtz. They were the Rebbe's doctors, and this is a picture that was taken, 5 days after the event that I'm talking about. So I don't know which doctor said this to the Rebbe, but they told the Rebbe as follows: you must take care of your health. You cannot speak to Hasidim. If not, there is a 25% chance of a relapse. And the doctor asked the Rebbe, do you understand what I'm telling you? So the Rebbe said, yes, you're telling me that even if I don't take care of my health, which I assure you I will, there is a 75% chance that I won't relapse. So the Rebbe's positive paraphrasing of life can seem radical, but it is in fact a necessary perspective for all of us to engage into the best of our ability. If we apply some of the Rebbe's optimism to our own lives, so problems would be revealed as potentials for growth, enemies would be understood as teachers, and setbacks would be seen for what they really are, springboards for the next level. So look at this article reported in the BBC a few years, just this past summer. And check out this study, okay? Researchers said pessimists could benefit from doing things like imagining a future where everything turns out well. The study used 2 existing groups of people recruited for different studies, 70,000 women and 1,500 men. Their levels of optimism were assessed, as well as their overall health. They were also asked about exercise and diets, as well as how much they smoked and drank alcohol. And look at the crazy statistic. On average, the most optimistic men and women had an 11 to 15% longer lifespan and were significantly more likely to live to 85 compared with their least optimistic group. That's mind-boggling. Being optimistic is not just the Rebbe's approach, but actually affects your health. Now, why do we focus so much on the negative? We all know, scientists declare that we have a negativity bias, that we tend to to retain in memory negative events 4 to 5 times longer from a positive event. And this is obvious. When you had 9 compliments throughout your day, oh, great work, this was great, this was terrific, thank you so much, and then one person criticizes you, which event are you more likely to remember when you come home? You remember the negative event, and this is called negativity bias or negative positive asymmetry. And it's something that the news reporters know also well, that if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't read. You know, people want to see negative. They remember the negative. It piques their interest much more. So this is our natural bias. And yet we have to, the Rebbe is showing us a model for how to change our bias, our ability to change our bias to see only the positive. Now, scientists say the reason we focus on the negative is because it's a matter of survival. If we forget the positive things that happen to us, big deal. But if we forget the negative things, so then we won't find solutions to dangerous issues. So that's why we tend to focus on the negative, but it's way extreme. And not just that, it used to be what was considered a negative attack. A bear came and attacked you. Now we're reading negative headlines every other minute. So our amygdala is constantly heightened and shocked and nervous and anxious. It's extremely damaging. So we're always walking around in a low-level state of hypervigilance and anxiety, and we tend to blow our negative experiences out of proportion and fail to contextualize these negative events with the positive aspects of our life that we have forgotten in moments of stress, right? So here's a letter where the Rebbe writes to someone who wrote many letters to the Rebbe, and he's always complaining. So this is what the Rebbe writes to him. He says, in our world, everything is a mixture of good and bad. Human beings must choose which aspects they will emphasize, contemplate, and pursue. There's nothing that's wholly good and nothing that's wholly bad. Everyone will have a mixture of good and bad. I'm going to paraphrase the rest of the letter because it's a little long. But the Rebbe makes the point that according to the Talmud, Adam was considered ungrateful because he was in paradise. He was in the Garden of Eden, and yet he complained about not having a mate. He had so many gifts around him, and he still found reason to complain. Compare that with Jews who were in the concentration camps, going through horrifying experiences, and yet they took the time to recite the morning blessings every day and to say, we're grateful that our soul returned to us in the morning. And the Rebbe says both of these are extremes. Obviously, no one lives in paradise like Adam, and no one has to go through, God forbid, the horrors that our many Jews experienced in the Holocaust. But I'll continue reading the letter. My point in saying all this is not to admonish you, it is simply to underscore the reality. The type of lives that we live, whether full of satisfaction and meaning, or the opposite, depends in large measure on our own willpower, which dictates whether we will focus on the positive or the negative. Our perspectives are so powerful that can lead us to find fault with paradise or to express gratitude even while in a state of extreme suffering. Now, just try to remember a little bit about the Rebbe's life. The Rebbe was had an extremely positive outlook, but let me remind you that the Rebbe lived through waves of pogroms, the killing fields of World War I, a typhus epidemic, a refugee crisis, the persecution and forced exile of his father, whom he never saw again, the Bolshevik Revolution, the rise of communism, World War II, the brutal murder of his brother, grandmother, and numerous other close relatives at the hands of Nazis, and a life of childlessness. Add to the fact the Rebbe personally absorbed and carried the crushing pain of hundreds and thousands of individuals who sought him out for healing, comfort, love, acceptance, help, and sometimes simply a reason to live. And yet, the Rebbe once told his aide, one of his aides, Rabbi Baruch Yunik, he said, I worked on myself to always look at things in a positive light. Otherwise, I could not have survived. Which tells us that it's not like the Rebbe was born an optimist. It's not like the Rebbe was an optimist, and therefore he preaches the power of optimism. The Rebbe says he actually had to teach himself and train himself to see things against the natural negativity bias that we all contain. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to continue to highlight some of the key teachings and tools culled from the Rebbe's guidance, which will help enable us, obviously through dedication and commitment, to design our very own positivity bias. And with that, I just want to share that I actually started a podcast on this. These lessons are now in podcast form, in case you like listening to them on Spotify or Apple iTunes, wherever you listen to podcasts. Today's lesson 2, which I made episode 1, is already up. It's a slightly different than the Zoom version, and hopefully later today I'll put up episode 2. Still in the middle of working on that episode, and please share with me any feedback you have on the episodes. Okay, thank you for joining.